Hello, it's Dr. Cindy with this week's Mental Health Moment. Last week, I talked about the healing process and the fact that emotional healing, just like physical healing, requires both time and attention. I told the story of a woman who had lost her husband of 50 years. She came to me 6 months later because she was still experiencing a great deal of sadness about his death, and friends had expressed concern that she was so upset about this loss. I worked with her on helping her accept that, of course, she still missed her husband and felt sad about losing him, and encouraged her to process her grief in the time and way that was right for her. Today, I want to talk more about grief. We often think of grief as involving the death of a loved one or a beloved pet, or the loss of a relationship or friendship. But grief can also occur as a result of a significant change in life circumstances, such as a move and the loss of a job, or health issues that cause some type of physical limitation. There has been a great deal of grief experienced in the past year worldwide, not only because of the many lives that have been lost, but also because our usual way of life has been taken away. It is important to recognize grief in all of its forms in order to ensure sufficient support for ourselves or others who are going through it. Having said that, I'm going to focus primarily on grief related to death. Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was a pioneer in grief research, and she suggested that there are 5 stages in the grieving process. She based this on her observations and conversations with people who were terminally ill as they try to come to terms with their impending passing. In her seminal book on death and dying, she described the emotional process that people go through in facing their own death before reaching the final stage of acceptance, where they make peace with the fact that their life is coming to an end. Her work has subsequently been extrapolated and applied to a wide range of circumstances involving grief. More recently, David Kessler collaborated with her to write on grief and grieving, and he has proposed that another element of grief is finding meaning in the losses that we experience. Although it is now thought that grief is more individualized and less patterned than Dr. Kubler-Ross's original framework would suggest, the components of it are important to consider as possible experiences during the grieving process. So I'm going to spend some time talking about them now. I consider these to be more coping strategies than they are specific stages, reflecting how we try to grapple with something that is so emotionally painful. For many people, denial is one common reaction upon learning that someone important to them is terminally ill or has already died. This entails disbelief and shock and not being able to wrap their mind around the reality of the situation. Although at some point the death becomes undeniable, people sometimes may still momentarily forget that their loved one has passed away. Initially, our brains do this as a protective measure to give us breaks from the full onslaught of the intense pain of the loss. And while this most often happens regularly when the loss first occurs, there can be moments of this months and even years later. For example, it is not uncommon for someone to have the thought of calling a deceased loved one to ask a question or tell a funny story, only to then have to remind themselves that the person is no longer alive. Anger is another common response to loss. Anger is a secondary emotion that covers over hurt and is a defensive reflex against hurt. This is another way the brain tries to protect us from the full impact of our challenging feelings. Anger is an activating emotion that makes us feel powerful and forceful, which can be a more comfortable state than the vulnerability of getting in touch with our deep sadness. It also arises as part of the brain's problem-solving process. It wants to know who's to blame for the problem as a means of hopefully figuring out how to resolve it. But since there's no way to fix the death of a loved one, sometimes people get stuck in the angry phase of grief for quite some time. The anger can also make us feel guilty, particularly if we find ourselves being angry at the person who died. Logically, we might know it is not fair to blame that person for not being alive anymore, but you've heard me say many times, emotions don't care about logic and reason. We might also feel angry at ourselves or others for not somehow preventing the death from happening. It is common for EMTs, veterinarians, doctors, and other medical personnel to be on the receiving end of anger when they have been unsuccessful in saving a loved one's life. And we have certainly been seeing a lot of anger and blame being expressed all over social media in this past year as people struggle to come to terms with all of the losses that COVID has created. After we lose someone, we might find ourselves feeling angry at other people in our lives if they don't seem to be honoring the death in the way we think they should. We may even be angry at the rest of the world about going about its business like nothing happened, while we feel our own world has ended as a result of the loss. Anger always looks for a target, so anyone and everyone is fair game, even God. In the bargaining phase of grief, we often play out what if or if only scenarios for how things might have progressed differently so our loved one would still be alive. Because our brain doesn't differentiate past, present, and future, it reviews the entire timeline and looks for any and every place where doing something different could have possibly ended in a better outcome. It's like a mental rewind where our brain attempts to solve the problem of the death by coming up with a do over that could maybe have resulted in the death not happening. So we might, for example, think about how a parent could still be alive if only she had gone to the doctor sooner, or gone to a different doctor, or taken better care of herself. Or we play out what if I had taken my pet to the vet earlier, or used a different brand of dog food, or paid for more tests and treatments. You can see here how this could also easily cause us to lapse back into anger about those steps not being taken. When we play out these hypothetical solutions, we inevitably come right back to the painful reality of what actually occurred and re experience all of the challenging emotions related to the death. It is also common to have thoughts that we didn't spend enough time with or do enough for a loved one that has passed away. These are all false assumptions by the brain, again, in service of trying to make the problem go away. Just as we can't undo a death by imagining different actions or decisions in the past, we also can't spare ourselves the pain of our grief by mentally correcting perceived mistakes in our relationship with our deceased loved one. There is no amount of time you could spend with or attention we could give to a person or pet that would ever make it not hurt when they pass away. That's just another way of the brain trying to figure out how to stop the pain. But rather than relieving our pain, this actually causes more because we're left feeling guilty and having regrets on top of the incredible sadness of the loss. So be careful about those false solutions and conclusions the brain comes up with because they are a setup for more hurt. Perhaps the most commonly recognized grief response is what Kubler-Ross called depression. It is the deep sadness and mourning that comes with truly facing the reality of the death. During this period, we may most strongly feel the emotional impact of the loss as the denial, anger, and bargaining fade away, and we are left with the awareness of no longer having our loved one in our life. There are multiple opportunities for feelings of guilt during this part of the process as well. If the person's end of life was particularly challenging, such as a prolonged illness that took a significant physical and emotional toll on the loved one and the caregivers, there can naturally be some relief that the grueling situation has ended. But that can quickly trigger guilt because it doesn't feel okay to experience something positive about the person's passing. And since our brains give us breaks from our pain, we may sometimes find ourselves laughing about something or enjoying an experience in the midst of our grieving. That can also make us feel guilty as though we are supposed to be sad all of the time. That is an unnecessary and harmful expectation for someone to impose on themselves. There's no right or wrong way to grieve, and no amount of suffering that anyone is supposed to endure as a way of honoring the death of someone they cared about. It is okay to appreciate, enjoy, and even look forward to those breaks in the grief. They are designed to help us get through it. Anyone who has experienced a loss knows that the sadness never goes away completely. It also has a process of its own, and it does not progress in a linear way. Holidays, birthdays, and the anniversary of the death can all bring a resurgence of intense sadness. In between, there are many bittersweet moments when something will remind us of our loved one, and often that makes us cry, especially early on. At some point, we turn a corner on our grief, and the memories that pop into our head don't always bring quite as much sadness, and sometimes even make us smile or laugh with appreciation and gratitude for those experiences. So, what do we do with all of these challenging emotions? As with all emotions, whatever their cause or reason, it is important for us to allow ourselves to feel them no matter how challenging that might seem. When we resist our feelings or try to ignore, suppress, or distract ourselves from them, they may seem to go away for the time being, but they do not truly resolve and heal. Instead, they build in intensity and can ambush us with a flood of emotions once they have reached a critical mass that our defense mechanisms can no longer successfully keep at bay. Accepting all of the feelings that grief brings to us as being a natural part of the process can also help reduce the guilt or self-criticism that comes from thinking we shouldn't feel a certain way. Remember that emotions are just a bodily function and an energy that needs expression and attention in order to be released. It is when our brain hijacks that process with its problem-solving reaction that our feelings become more complicated and we struggle more to work through them. I strongly recommend writing as a way to get those challenging thoughts off of your mind when your brain persists in having its say. When we write information down, whether it's for a grocery list, a meeting we are preparing for, or an emotional concern we are experiencing, our brain then knows we have recorded our thoughts somewhere and will often free us from having them constantly swirling around in our heads. Writing to the loved one that passed or speaking to them in your head or even out loud can also be a good outlet for expressing your feelings about them and also helping you feel connected to them. Guided meditations are a wonderful way to quiet the busy brain and relax the body. And engaging with the heart to provide comfort and compassion to ourselves through the emotional pain is ultimately what will help soothe and heal the hurt. Why does it hurt so much to lose someone? Of course, there are so many different aspects to our relationships with others and what makes them important to us. But at the most fundamental level, when we lose someone that we love, we experience it as a loss of love. We no longer have their physical presence in our lives, no chance to see them, hold them, talk to them, spend time with them, which means it would seem no chance to connect with them. So it feels as though the love that we experienced with them has ended as well, and that can leave us feeling heartbroken. But let's reflect on this idea of the loss of love for a moment. Can love truly be taken away? I propose that love transcends physical presence and therefore cannot be extinguished even by death. As we consider this, I want to ask you to think of someone you love very much who is alive and well and an active and important part of your life today. Close your eyes and bring that person or pet fully to mind. Now put your hand on your heart and connect to the love you feel for them. Let it fill your heart and flow through it. Draw the love in with your breath and release it all throughout your body when you exhale. You might feel warmth or surge of energy, or even like your heart is expanding as it stretches with the fullness of the love that you have for that special someone. Take a moment and really let yourself experience and enjoy that wonderful, powerful love. Now express gratitude in your heart to whoever it is that you are experiencing that love for. Keeping your hand on your heart, I want you now to connect to the deep love you have for someone who has passed away. Whether it is a parent, a friend, a spouse, a sibling, a pet, whatever loved one that may be, allow yourself to feel within your heart the strength and energy and depth of the love the two of you share between you. Let it fill your heart and flow through it. Draw it in with your breath and release it all throughout your body as you exhale. Feel the warmth, the surge of energy. Feel your heart expand as it stretches with the fullness of the love that you have for them. Take a moment and really let yourself experience and enjoy that wonderful, amazing love. Now express gratitude in your heart to whoever it is that you are expressing love to. As you open your eyes, I want you to try to hold on to that fullness in your heart. Keeping your hand there can help as it makes it easier to stay tuned into the heart and to tune out the brain. Notice the connection you feel to whoever it was that you chose to express love to. That is the foundation of your relationship with them, not their physical presence in your life, how much time you spent together, what activities you did, or the conversations you had. Those were all elements of the relationship that helped you form and solidify that connection, but it is the love that you felt and shared that made that person or pet so special to you. And as you hopefully just experienced, that didn't go away when your loved one died. It remains where it has always been, safely secured within your heart. When we think about someone who has passed, our brain focuses on their absence in our lives. So while the head reminds us of the loss, the heart reminds us of the love. That means that whenever you find yourself feeling sad and missing that significant other, connecting with them and the love that you shared is always as close as your own heart and can never be lost. That's it for today. Take care. We'll see you next week.